in the article from the standpoint of actually, harder to get at that is really to look at what was he in the middle of. Now, if you look at, there was quite an epistemological war going on. And there's a very famous little letter I'd like to start with from Mozart to his father. He wrote this on July 3rd, 1778. And he writes to his father, he says, "Now I give you a piece of news that you perhaps already have, and namely that the godless arch-rogue Voltaire, so to say, dropped dead like a dog, like an animal. That is his reward." So he was very clear. And so he was involved in an incredible war, because when you often heard Lynn talk about the Mozart Revolution of 1782, that this was a turning point in what happened in all of music, because at that moment for Mozart, this is when he meets Bach. This is when you had Baron von Swieten, who was deployed to make sure that Bach was brought to Mozart and to Haydn, and we'd have these incredible music evenings, and they would be playing through Bach, different pieces, the different fugues of Bach. And if you look at what happened to Mozart at that point, I mean, he was always a genius, he always had incredible writings, but after that point, there was a real profound transformation in how he actually composed. And, and one of the things that actually led me into this work from the discussions I had with Lynn, which is how this happened, I started looking at, what's Mozart's writings before 1782, take a few of his compositions. And then I started looking at what happened after 1782. And it started becoming very striking. You sort of step back and you say, there's a change in how he thought about ideas. What is an idea? How do you develop an idea? How do you generate paradox? What is the whole bel canto breakthrough that he saw in Bach? And if you look back at Bach and you see what he was doing in the Art of the Fugue, the musical offerings, just any of his compositions, and then you look back at Mozart after he meets Bach, you see there's a whole different way that he generates these relationships, all based on what Lynn has always stressed, the primacy of the bel canto singing human voice. And everything comes from that standpoint. So Mozart, after that period, just incredibly changes. Now, even though the Ave Verum is the end of his life, this is why it's such a beautiful little thing, because it sort of sums up everything that he was doing in the much larger works. And that's where Lynn threw out the idea, look at something short like the Ave Verum. It was very striking, because I sat there and I looked at it and I said, okay. And because he had to rethink everything. Because you had to throw out all the textbooks, lessons on this stuff. And if anybody had textbooks, I went through every university in Pruitt up until I met Lynn, right when I dropped out, and joined Lynn. And so you had to rethink, what was these great discoveries? What did Lynn understand? What did Lynn know? And it became very, very clear if you take what Mozart did in this short little piece. And the thing that Lynn keeps stressing, as you noticed all these times, he says, look, you want to go for the question of the unity of effect. How do you get so that when you take a composition from the end to the beginning, there is one idea that carries the whole composition all the way through? That you have grabbed the mind of the listener, that at every point that you're unfolding it, you're taking him through this tension, this process of growth in the composition. And so the Ave Verum gives us a chance to do that in a very short period, even though, short period of a work. So what I want to do, rather than talk a lot about it, right, is actually read one thing from Lynn and then get you guys up here singing. And my idea is that I would like you guys to sing the whole thing through from beginning to end once. Okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the very end of the piece. We're going to start working from the end. And, recently I had a chance to work with Lynn and John and Renee and the Shavens and I were up at his house last month working on the Art of the Fugue. And at one point Lynn stopped us and said, okay. And we went to the end. and he said, and we worked extensively on one point at the end of the fugue we were on, and then we went back, and then said to us, you always have to know where you're going, so therefore, I want to start at the end, so that we know where we're going, and then we go back and work from the then, because that will shape what you do in the opening of a composition. Because you have to get into what is this one that is inside the mind of the composer. What is the paradox? What are the intentions? What is he setting up? And so I'll just read this one part it came from. This is Lynn's discussion in Mexico when he was down in Monterrey with the Lynn. And he said, now take another question. Let's take music. Let's take modern classical music, which is based on Bach. Now don't think about keyboard music. You could be easily fooled. You assume that the notes correspond to some frequency, which is standard. So that by hitting a key at the right pitch, you can make music is false. Because what you find the minute you face counterpoint, vocal counterpoint, or performance of classical string quartet, or the performance of a woodwind instrument, and take a composition by Bach, Haydn, Mozart, Schubert, Beethoven, and so forth, you find that you cannot perform these adequately if you simply try to play the notes according to their prefixed standard frequency. For example, you hear a chorus. They're singing the notes. Are they singing the music? They're not necessarily the same thing. Because the standard of performance and the standard of the intention of the classical composer is the presentation of an idea. Now, what a good performance means is that you hear the whole performance from beginning to end, as without interruption. Take the Mozart Ave Verum Corpus. The Ave Verum Corpus is based on choral work with Diunus string accompaniment. It's organized according to a series of Lydian intervals. The way it's done is with a good choral director, is to direct the voices to slightly adjust the tempering of the notes in effect as you hear a process of development from beginning to end, not just the individual parts. This is what the great conductor Furtwängler referred to as performing between the notes. Now, very few people singing in chorus actually achieve that intention as intended. And by working for that effect, they begin to understand it. And with a reasonable approximation for what should be heard, you find the choral music of that type is one of the most powerful political instruments of communication. The significance of the intervals in the Ave Verum Corpus, which I recommend because it's a short composition. It's a unity of a single conception from beginning to end. What you hear is not the notes. What you hear is the process of development. The principle is the same thing as Archytas' discovery of doubling the cube. So, with that thought in mind, why don't you, it'd be good to sing the whole piece from beginning to end once, just so we have the whole composition in our heads. And then from there, we'll go into it and address some of these questions that come up, because this question of not having a fixed frequency, not having a fixed pitch, I mean, this is so fundamental. The fact that you're playing in between these modalities, between the fact that you're playing within, creating something that is not in any of the parts themselves, but something that all the parts, as composers of one, actually generate something of a higher order. So why don't we start from that standpoint? If you guys have questions, then just bring them up as we're going through it. Okay? So let's move the table out of the way, and then you guys can come up here.
Want us to just sing from where we are?
Oh, you can sing from where you are, but sing in the chorus formation of some kind.
Oh, I
That's
see.
You might as well go on the front.
Okay.
Yeah, we can move the table and all this work in between.
No,
Anybody else who wants to sing? Yeah. Back in the tenor section.
You gotta read sheet music.
Give it your best shot.
It's good in Latin, but that's the initial one. You gotta read the notes.
Balance it out.